So these are boring screenshots, by the way, of Blender. But for example, this picture itself was created with Blender. So this is an upcoming movie which was created entirely with Blender. And Blender itself is free. So if something free is capable of doing something like this, so it should give you an idea that you might want to use it now. So I think this movie will also be released around next month, and it will be available for download as well. So it's called Elephant Dreams. So Blender is actually capable of doing something like this. I don't think I have Blender here. Let's try to consolidate. So if you've been using Photoshop and part of your work involves a lot of Photoshop stuff, and you're looking into moving into another platform or moving into another application, you might want to try out Begin or GNU image manipulation program. So it's basically, I won't explain it much of detail, but if you're familiar with Photoshop and what it can do, you can actually do it with the GIMP. So as for myself, I'm not really a digital artist, but I've been using GIMP for quick jobs, like for example, resizing images, creating new formats from JPEG to PNG. So that's just one of the parts that GIMP can do, but you can do more. If you're familiar with image manipulation, with layers, using a lot of brushes, gradients, patterns, GIMP can do the job. The nice thing about GIMP is that it's not only running on Windows, but if you're going to run Ubuntu or any Linux distribution out there, you should be able to use the GIMP as well. With very, very little studying involved, and the learning curve is actually quite small if you've been using it since on Windows, then moving to Linux, for example. So I found this on the web a few days ago, what the GIMP can actually do. So since GIMP arts are usually done in 2 dimensions or 2D, so it's mostly involved with brushes, compositions. So if you can do something like that with GIMP, who needs Adobe Photoshop? Who is into web development over here? Creating websites. Who has created a website? See now, website. If you would like to create or start, let's say you would just like to create your own website. Okay? You're tired of using Friendster as your website. Okay, so you might want to start creating a website yourself, but you don't have time to actually learn the internals of creating a website. Like you don't want to involve yourself in creating tags, embedding graphics. So you would rather, if there was a tool that is as simple as a word processor, then you can just save it as a website. That would be nice, right? So on the open source world, there's also a need for those people. Not a lot of people are technical people using Linux. There are a lot of people using Linux for their everyday lives, like for example, just checking email. Now, if they want to create a website itself, they wouldn't really possibly want to learn HTML from scratch, although it's a quite simple language. So what they would do is actually just look for an application that allows them to create things visually, then save it as an HTML and publish it to the web. So there's a project that is currently being sponsored by Lenspar. Lenspar is also one Linux distribution. It's currently being sponsored by Lenspar to create an application that you can actually create web pages as graphical as possible. It's called View. So if you're familiar with Macromedia Dreamweaver, last time I used Dreamweaver was Dreamweaver 4, I believe. So if you're familiar with the WYSIWYG features, or what you see is what you get, you might want to try out NView. So NView, we'll install it later. So if all the web development you want to do is something like this, what are the most common things that you actually do on the internet? Number one, obviously, you're browsing for websites. Number two is you're actually checking email. Number three is you're actually communicating with people on some sort of platform, like for example, Yahoo, MSN, or Jabber. So, just going in passing, we have 3 applications on the OpenCE. So, Firefox, obviously, I hope a lot of you have heard of Firefox. Mozilla Firefox, okay, that's good. So, Firefox is a lightweight web browser. So, it's available in various formats, in various platforms. It's not really a Linux original, because the Mozilla project, the one actually devoted time to Firefox, it's actually platform agnostic, so they try as much as possible to develop for all platforms. So Firefox itself is just one of the components of Mozilla. So if you've been using Firefox and seen the benefits of it, that's good. If you're still using IE and get horribly bugged about a lot of errors getting into IE or the viruses, usually the first thing that most people would recommend you change is your web browser. And so Firefox is part of the Mozilla Foundation. The next thing most people actually use the internet is actually email. So if you're in a company, most likely what you're using, the email client you're using is called Microsoft Outlook, right? Who's familiar with Outlook? One. Outlook. So anyway, it's part of the Microsoft Office suite. So the problem with viruses at the moment is that most of them originate from email. Okay, obviously if you're using a free email account like Yahoo, you also get spam. So it's all fine and dandy if you're just checking email online or on the web browser, but for people who has a need to actually download their email to their computer so they have a copy for future reference, it's important to actually have a secure email client. And products by Microsoft, like for example, the built-in Outlook Express for Windows and Microsoft Outlook doesn't really handle viruses that well unless you have a separate antivirus checker. If you're using a different email account and your ISP sends you spam and you don't want those, you might want to try Thunderbird. So Thunderbird basically is an email client. If you use Outlook Express, you're very much familiar with Thunderbird. So it uses a lot of Mozilla components. So most configurations for Mozilla Firefox are very much the same with Mozilla Thunderbird. The good thing is that if you're using Firefox and Thunderbird on Windows, you will be able to use them on Ubuntu as well for any Linux distribution, and you don't have to change or learn anything because it's the same application. So again, Thunderbird, if your needs are just email, Thunderbird is what I use. Okay, game. Who here has a Yahoo account? Yahoo Messenger. Yahoo Messenger. MSN. MSN, ano ba? ICQ. ICQ is quite old. Okay, obviously, maraming na Yahoo dito. Hindi ako maniniwala kung walang na Yahoo. So, unless Zamboanga has its own messaging platform. So anyway, for people like me who has a lot of accounts, which I have actually opened from the very start of the service came up, the problem with it is that if I'm using MSN, I actually have to download MSN Messenger. If I would like to use Yahoo or YM, I need to download my Yahoo Messenger. If I'm going to use ICQ, I still have to download ICQ, and so on and so forth. My brother uses AIM, or AOL Instant Messenger in the United States. I actually have to download AIM. So what happens is that my computer has 4 different programs for 4 different protocols. If you're there's one problem with AIM though, and most Yahoo people will ask about it. is it possible to actually have webcams for game? Because a lot of net cafes have webcams, right? And they use it. Oh man, I see photos everywhere. Every net cafe is a webcam. Unfortunately, game doesn't support that yet. But if your needs are just instant messaging, game can do the job. There are a lot of efforts to actually have webcam support for game. But the problem is the hardware. On Linux, it's quite hard to have a webcam to do that. It's possible, but not in an easy way that we are used to. It's possible we would like to have everything easy, right? So, if your needs are simple and you just want to connect all your clients in one application, game can do the job. At home, you've been bugged constantly about actually registering it. I see a lot of computers doing that or have that. So, you don't actually need MedSim for that. Since SIP is very much an open format. A lot of applications that are using it, utilizing it. You would just want to make sure that your computer has all the applications that you need. You're not installing anything more. So 7-zip can actually do that for you. So if you're familiar with zip, tabs, gzips, bzips, these are mostly on the Windows on the Linux side, then RPM, so it can open it. So as an archive application, it's quite simple. We don't need to explain that. You just want to open up as an archive format. So here, associate with 7-zip main. So we have 2 for around 12 archive formats. Notepad, okay. Notepad, almost no one uses Notepad on Windows. So, but some people still do. So the problem with one thing I noticed about when you're doing things on Windows, if you would like to edit up a source format or a C++ or whatever in your assignments, you don't need a big application to edit your code. There's nothing by default that you can actually use except Notepad. And Notepad is actually probably, in my opinion, the worst application to use when you're actually editing source, because it's basically just Notepad. It does nothing. Okay? So also one thing about nice thing about Windows is that it has very, very good multimedia support. So although it's not really true, but you put in most formats, you just install a codec and it runs. So the problem is that when you actually need to extend what you're actually doing, like for example recording stuff in your computer. So the simple voice recorder of Windows doesn't do the job. Who's actually involved here with post-processing, signal processing, or have an interest in music and would like to record stuff on your computer. So I guess some people would actually want to do that. So on the multimedia side, we have 3 applications included, which are Audacity, Celestia, and just a bunch of screensavers. So, like I said, Audacity is a sound editing program. So, if you want stuff that you can actually record, play, mix, or apply effects, Audacity can do the job. The font is pretty nice actually if you're doing effects like that. So, Audacity is just a simple recorder. If you want to observe sound patterns, Garcia, that they were using that, and Audacity can do the job. When you were having lunch earlier, or probably in line waiting for lunch, I was actually running a simulation program called Celestia. So Celestia is basically a simulation of the entire universe. So a lot of teachers I know in Manila and abroad are using it to teach children or students about space or whatever, the cosmos. So kanina pinapanda ko ito. Games, who is into games? I know maraming may games dito. Kasi sa internet cafe, nagagalawan na rin. Marami naglalaro. Okay. So, games in the OpenCD are not really that great, but by themselves they are playable. Okay? So we currently have only 2 games, Sokoban and Battle of Quest Not. So if you're into puzzle games and just want to check it out, there's Sokoban. This is what it looks like. It's free as well. Battle of Quest Not, I was playing it later, Medina. It's a turn-based strategy game. So if you've been observing on the screen much earlier, I was actually playing this program, and it's part of the OpenCD. So we'll try to run this later. I'm almost at the end of my presentation. So we're currently developing a new version of the OpenCD. So since Ubuntu 6.04 is coming out in April next month, the OpenCD will have a new version as well. So what we're planning around middle of this month, we have a cleaner layout on the application. These are basically development issues that we are currently doing. And when you actually receive Ubuntu 6.04, the OpenCD project, we are the ones responsible for actually running the OpenCD, the Foss, or the Windows Free Open Source Software components. We're also responsible for Ubuntu and Ubuntu on the live CD components. OpenCD 4, we have simple, when you try it later, when you go home, boot up your Ubuntu CD, the live CD component on Windows, and you'll find something similar to this one, which contains the live with Foss components. So, yeah. So, you might want to get started with open source. I mean, not just with OpenCD. So, these are just very, very simple suggestions to actually learn about open source. A lot of stuff on the OpenCD have links to those websites. There's one magazine that I'm currently writing for, which is called the Free Software Magazine. We actually do it every quarter. I think there's another issue coming out this month or early next month, and I have an article over there about Muslim life. So you might want to check it out. It's a free magazine, by the way. Just go to the website freesoftwaremagazine.com, register, and you can download the PDF version of the magazine. So again, the OpenCD. If you would like to check out Windows components, the OpenCD is a nice thing to do. And in the future, after using the OpenCD, you might want to check out Ubuntu itself, which I will discuss tomorrow. So ubuntu.com. So since the OpenCD is a very, very simple way to actually get involved in open source. So the nice thing about Foss itself is that you are empowered to do so by yourself. So on your campus, most of you are students, you might want to try it out. You might want to start your own group over here in Zamboanga, and you're free to do so. Join us on Summer Freedom Day. And if you're looking into using Ubuntu CDs for your events, please do ask from our website, shipit.ubuntu.com, for extra CDs, like what Medina has asked for this event. Okay, so I guess we'll try the OpenCD itself. Yeah. So again, before I end this talk and go to demo, if you need to email me or something or concerns, jacob@ubuntu.com. I also have Yahoo, ym.www.gs.com. So yeah. So like I said earlier, I'm doing the entire presentation on OpenOffice.org and Friends on Windows. So I created the whole thing on my Ubuntu partition and put it into Windows. And now I have my presentation in Windows. So it only means that I can actually still do my work on a free software environment and still present it to you as if nothing happened. So, okay. I was talking about earlier about essays about open source. So these are parts of the OpenCD at the moment. The Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's one of the most seminal pieces of work with regards to the free software philosophy. describes how free software is as a bazaar compared to a proprietary software as a casino, meaning hindi mo pwedeng galawin. But when you're in a bazaar, you have a choice. That's where free software comes in. So it's all part of the Open CD. You might want to check it out. So it's a whole book. And also part of the Open CD is Richard Stallman's book. Paolo mentioned earlier about Richard Stallman. We're actually planning an event around August, right? August about that. And we've invited Richard Stallman to come over in Medina. So Richard Stallman actually is one of the original people who started the free software philosophy. So he wrote a book called PS and Freedom. He released it in a free format. So that's why we have the book at the moment. So it's also part of the Open CD. And a lot of essays from known free software personalities like Larry Wall, who started Pearl, Bruce Perez, Tim O'Reilly, Paul Bixie, a very, very Unix guy, Linux Torvalds itself. So a lot of these essays are part of the Open CD. I'll probably give this copy to someone and have him responsible for creating copies. So the Open CD itself, the applications, everything is here. It's really good to see. Celeste is in this application. So, and also the games that I used early on. So, that's just one of the few. Now, what most people, since we're going to talk a lot about open office, though I don't have that much noise about it, most people are concerned about compatibility, right? So, the question would be, is OpenOffice.org compatible with Microsoft Office? So, we'll just try to do this with the presentation that I did earlier. So, we'll try to open it on PowerPoint itself. So, this is the presentation that I did in open document presentation format, so ODP. So Open Office should be okay. So we have OpenOffice.org Impress. It says Foss at Zamboanga Open CD Project.ODP. So the biggest problem is that if I'm going to send this to someone who doesn't have Open Office, he or she wouldn't be able to open it, right? So what I'll do now is actually save this into a format in which Microsoft PowerPoint will actually recognize. Let me first check if I have a PowerPoint view over here. Yeah, I have Microsoft Office PowerPoint view 2003, so we'll try to open that later. So let's save this first. Like I said earlier on, the OpenOffice suite can save into a variety of formats, not just its own format or the open document format, but if you would like to save it into, let's say, Microsoft Office, we'll just choose it from here. Where is it? Okay. Microsoft PowerPoint 97 2000 XP PPT. So we save it on the desktop. Now I have.
How about the other way around?
Right.
How about the other way around?
PowerPoint to ODP. Unfortunately, we cannot do PDFs in reverse because PDFs. Oops. Wait a minute. So let's do are created with a different program. I'm not really that much familiar with how PDFs are doing, but on the documentation side, we're using a toolchain called Apache Falcone. Or on Windows, we're using something like Acrobat still. So PDFs, another format, I think it's possible, but not currently done in open office. With regards to PowerPoint to ODP, yes, can be done. Questions? With regards, okay, I think one of the, like I said earlier, one of the most people actually ask me, especially companies, if it's possible to actually move their Access databases to a different format. Because a lot of people are having a really, really hard time with Access and they want to scale further. So the problem is that Access doesn't scale that well. So what the OpenCD can do, well not really the OpenCD, but OpenOffice can do is actually export the data from the Access database, then allow you to manipulate the data, then move it to another format, and for example, so on the other applications like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, very, very little issues. Most of the issues are really on the formatting side, not much on the data. Data can actually be preserved. Like for example, if you saw earlier what we did is that we exported our OGP, our OpenOffice.org presentation to place.
My name is Yolynne from the National Computer Center. We're very interested in open source because we are also advocating it. Now, one more project involved community centers, and one of those centers presented the project was we wanted to promote Linux-based operating systems in the center. However, their concern was they could not install the so the question is there any initiative to address this kind of problems?
Okay. We don't develop everything from scratch. Okay, so it's good. I'll answer the question first. I can explain it more on detail tomorrow, but basically what Ubuntu does is grab what is being developed by upstream, what we call upstream. Our upstream is actually Debian, the Debian project itself. So Debian creates most of the packages. So if there are initiatives to actually do something like webcam support for game, for example, or GAP-E, it will come into Ubuntu. So if you're going to ask me if there are initiatives on Ubuntu itself happening, there is a community initiative being done. But I think the problem is that you need to have a different kernel or the kernel of Ubuntu itself to actually run it. One of the guys who actually tried to run GAP-E, GAP-E is like a Yahoo Instant Messenger replacement that has webcam support. He was able to run it, but there are still some issues with regards to the licensing of the software itself. If the original developer of the software won't release it on a friendly license that allows for distribution, it just won't happen for now. But there are plans for Game 2.0 to actually support that. Before, since webcams are basically USB devices that use different protocols or something, I'm not really that familiar with webcams because I actually don't use them very much. Before, a lot of people actually have to recompile their own kernels for that, but most people won't go for that thing. So I guess the best thing to do at the moment is actually wait for Game 2.0. So on the Ubuntu side, we're not able to package Game 2.0 for April next month because Game 2.0 itself is not yet finished.
For GIMP and NVIDIA. The other question is it possible to hang up with PC game like Counter-Strike and NBA Live when we have Ubuntu as our operating system in-house?
A lot of people have been asking about that, especially, for example, with games. year about the BSA rating shops for using pirating software. Well, not only the operating system itself, but the games itself. There are initiatives, not really initiatives from the game developers themselves to be able to run cross-platform. But it's currently being done by a third-party software developer called Transgaming. There's a software application on Unix called Wine that allows you to actually run some Windows applications on Linux. The problem is that everything is reverse engineered and it doesn't do it perfectly. There are games that actually run perfectly on Wine, like for example, StarCraft, Warcraft. I'm not sure about Counter-Strike, but I have what's that? The one who did Unreal Tournament. The reason why I'm familiar with that is because I'm with the mobile games development as well, so I'm very much familiar with the gaming scene. So for now, there's very, very little action, unfortunately, happening for games like Ragnarok to run natively on Linux. With regards to update, okay, with the first question, going back to the first question about Kim and you, right? And
That's right.
Yeah. Changes, right? Changes. Updates to the application, right? Updates to the application. Yes. I'm going to talk about Ubuntu specifically, okay? On Ubuntu, every release, let's say the 5.10 release, which you have at the moment, there are no major updates to be done on the applications. Since we have a very, very fast development cycle, we only focus on security updates. So for example, if you have Git, what version of Git is here? Let's check. Okay, we have Git 2.2 over here. So I believe on 6.04 we'll have Git 2.4. If you're using Ubuntu 5.10, we won't update to 2.4, Git 2.4, but we will provide fixes or patches to 2.2. If you would like to use a new version of NView or Git into your existing Linux distribution, you will have to do it either from source or backport. Backports are basically adding new applications, not part of the original distribution. So we will provide security updates for that.
Sir, I still have one more question here. How are we going to access the source code of Linux?
Access the source code, okay. These are very, very technical questions now. So Ubuntu itself is just a collection of open source applications, which we collectively call as Linux. But when we're talking about Linux itself, we're talking about the kernel that runs everything. So the source code itself can be downloaded on the internet. It's kernel.org. It's in kernel.org. Kernel.org is where the kernel developers, the Linux kernel developers, all put their stuff together. Development, the stable versions of the kernel, development versions, and the archive for old kernels. So if there are parts of the new kernel that you would like to have access, you just go to kernel.org and download the Linux kernel source code itself. It's around 16 MB.
We want to create a live CD with custom software. Does Ubuntu have the documentation on how to create a live CD?
It's on the bottom. Okay. If we're going to talk about live CD, you mean a live CD Ubuntu itself or just the open CD? It would depend. The live CD infrastructure is capable of being modified by itself by what we call pre-seeding. When we pre-seed, it's, how can I explain it in a much easier way? Okay. Pre-seeding is basically telling the installer what to include on your live CD. The live CD component is very much different from install CD because they use different installer applications. On the installer CD itself, we use DI or Debian installer. On the live CD, we use Casper, what we call Casper. On actually creating your own live CDs, you would need to, number one, learn about Casper. Number two, learn about pre-seeding. Fortunately, pre-seeding is a DI or a Debian installer thing. So everything is well documented. If you might want to check out the CD later on at home and look into either the live CD or the installer CD of Ubuntu, there is a folder called Documents, I believe. Let me check, it's probably here. It explains extensively about pre-seeding, actually. See, there's Casper. And it is where is it? So this is just an example basic for the documentation itself. So you will have to check this out. Okay. So this is what we call the pre-seed configuration file. It is a bit complicated with the live CD component, but if you're going to make your own custom installer, it would be much easier. But like I said, if you want to create your own stuff, it's called pre-seeding. Everything is well documented in this folder. This is the actual installation manual because the live CD, Casper, and Debian installer are installer components. So there's something you can learn about pre-seeding. Let's just check it last. CD, so everything is much slower compared to the old install. Okay. It's a bit complicated with the live CD, but with the installer CD, you can create your own custom installer with just the pre-seed file. So this is what you want to check out, pre-seeds. But most of you are computer science people anyway. I guess you have the patience to do that. So, is there anything more? Not okay. Okay, so what we did earlier on is actually copy the files from my Windows partition to the USB disk and move it over here and try to open it. So what I did is that, okay, so I opened the PDF file. So obviously my presentation is only going to open in Ubuntu or in OpenOffice specifically. So it should be a problem with PDF or the PowerPoint. It all matters is how they format the binary file itself. Okay, live stream is taking a while. Any more questions while waiting for this one? Question? It's the same. This is with the ODP. Okay, how about PDF? I don't think this would look that way. Yeah, very much the same, okay. How about the PowerPoint? much like what it did earlier on. So basically, we still have our data. So what I probably do over here is so it's basically the same presentation, just removed. Okay, yes.
On the matter of shifting to Ubuntu as your operating system, do we have support for other peripherals such as printers, scanners, drivers for such stuff that we usually have with Windows XP? Do Ubuntu provide support for drivers and all those stuff?
Okay.
We would be the right person to ask this, but we would just want to know if we would be subscribing to a internet provider, say for example, smart Wi-Fi or other stuff. Does the operating system support such internet providers?
Okay. Like for example, printers. I can only say from experience that most of the printers that I have are HP printers. I have an HP all-in-one at home. When I say an all-in-one, it has a scanner, it has a printer, it has fax. It works since it's connected by a USB, and Ubuntu provides HP drivers by default. It ran out of the box. So on the printers, it just detected that I had a printer, or it's either it detects automatically, or you configure it manually, but it knows that you're using an HP printer. As for the scanner, anything that is called SANE compliant, or SANE, I forgot the acronym, should work with XSANE, which is actually part of here. The best thing is to actually, before buying anything, or if you already bought something, is check for compatibility with upstream. So let's see on graphics, we have, it doesn't have it over here. So, but if you're using a full install of Ubuntu, you might try it out later. It has an application called XSANE. It's actually your scanner interface. So I was able to run my HP all-in-one printer on that. I don't remember the exact model. If you give me an email later or next week, I can give you the exact model for that. But HP all-in-one printers are supported out of the box. With regards to Bluetooth HID, or human interface devices like keyboards and mice are detected out of the box as long as your Bluetooth is detected. What was your question again about subscription? Yes, ISPs. I have a buy until DSL at home, which I'm very, very happy about. I'm connected via Ethernet. I'm not so sure about those things that actually connect you via USB. I couldn't say for those, but anything that has PPPoE, or point-to-point protocol over Ethernet, should be fine. But unfortunately, if you're running a different operating system, or if you're using a router in your ISP, chances are your ISP will say we don't support that. They would rather prefer you to install directly. So what I did was actually install it from a router, then just connect to my wireless router via Ethernet. So yes, anything that has PoE or dial-up, as long as your device is supported, like for example modems. Modems are quite, a lot of people still use modems, right? Unfortunately, a lot of modems are not supported unless you're using a real modem or an external modem that you pipe through your, I think serial, I don't remember. It's been a while since I used a modem. I'm sorry about that. So yes, most of the protocols, well, all protocols are supported by default. The only thing you'll have a problem is that if you have a device that is so new, for example, some guy would actually release a printer on a different connecting differently. Let's say connecting via Wi-Fi if that's even possible. So those things are not even possible yet. But fortunately, a lot of peripheral or device manufacturers have been staying to most standards. Like for example, USB. For example, I plug in my USB device. It's either detected as a USB device itself or as a hard drive device like what I did earlier. So I got it working on Windows, it should work on Linux. So most of the time, fortunately, hardware manufacturers are being aware of that. So we should expect things to be much better in the future. Yeah, anything more?
Comprehensive lecture on the Open CD, Mr. Jerome Gotangco. Sir?
Okay, by the way, tomorrow if you're coming over, we'll actually be more hands-on. Unfortunately, we have computers over there. What we'll be going to try tomorrow is actually run Windows and Ubuntu alongside of each other. I'll also be talking to some. So if you're here tomorrow and you would like to learn more about how to actually go over to the next level, we'll do that tomorrow.
All right,
Thank you very much.